Okay. Welcome, everyone, to our fifth working group session for the HART TOD pilot project. My name is Michelle Zender. I'm a planner with HDR, and I will be the host for today's call. Steve, you want to go to the next slide? So I'll kick us off with a quick review, a quick review of our agenda. Nicole McCleary with HART will give us a brief introduction of the overall project. Steve Shoecraft with HGR will provide an overview of our recommended plan strategies for the corridor. We'll have an opportunity for a group discussion, and then we'll close out the call with next steps and contact information. Next slide. So just again, to go over our meeting logistics, we have the chat button, which is located on the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you'll get your chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. And we welcome you to use that to ask any questions or make comments as we go through the presentation. We'll be monitoring it as we go. Please mute your line to avoid any background noise. If you'd like to speak, there's a raise hand feature. If you hover over your name, you should see it, and we'll be tracking that as well and we'll let the presenter know who would like to speak. If you have any trouble during our session with your computer video or audio, you can always join using your phone. The call-in information is provided in the meeting invite. And if you have any trouble in general, please feel free to email me. My email address is there on the screen, and I will put it in the chat as well. And next slide. And Nicole, I'll pass it to you for the introduction.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the study team working group meeting for the TOD. My name is Nicole McCleary. I am the Deputy Project Manager for this study. So just to share a little bit with you about the project team, we have an awesome consultant team that's headed up by HDR. The study team itself is a partnership of HART, the City of Tampa, Hillsborough County, Hillsborough MPO, and the Planning Commission. We have this fabulous working group that you're all a part of that includes neighborhood associations and representatives, major property owners, developers, and institutions that are really within the study area or along the study area. So as I said, we have like the superhero consultant team, HDR, SB Friedman, Plus Serbia, Street Sense, and Playbook. Next slide, please. So the purpose of our working group is really a sounding board. We want to bring information to you guys to, understand what we have discovered within the study area, what we've analyzed, and what kind of recommendations we've come up with. It's an informal group, and it's a way to really for you guys to be. It's really an informal group, and it's a way for you guys to be heard. So, as I said previously, the membership is wide and diverse. So we have small business associations and small businesses within the neighborhood, as well as major property owners and major institutions. So we hold these meetings every 2 months, and really, this is your opportunity to tell us what you think about how the project is going and where it's going. Next slide, please. So for the TOD study, we came up with 5 study goals. And the study goals include to protect and improve community character, encourage a diverse mix of transit supportive uses. That includes housing, workplaces, shops, and supportive services, to create complete, safe, walkable streets. And these streets and networks should also be bikeable to ensure context-sensitive buildings and public spaces. And when we say that, we want development to really look like the neighborhoods. We want it to fit in and not stand out. We also want to improve transportation modes both locally and regionally. So our study is about 18 months, and it includes 3 phases. We're just wrapping up really the policies and strategies phase, and we'll talk about that today, talk about some recommendations, what we found, and why we think these recommendations will work. And then for the 3rd phase will be our station area planning, which we'll go into this summer. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Nicole. What we're going to present today is pretty much what we covered in the public workshops that we held this time last month. So I think it was the 25th and 26th. We held workshops for the general public, introduced them to the project, talked about what we've learned through the study and where we're headed in terms of policies and strategies. So this presentation is going to focus on the policy and strategy end of that spectrum. So I'll give you a quick update on where things stand and then really focus in on how the recommendations are evolving and give us plenty of time on the call for discussion, for feedback, for Q&A. So the fundamental question that we're asking is, what does transit service mean for communities along the project corridor? When we talk about transit service, we're talking about 2 forms of transit service enhancement. One is the HART arterial BRT project, and the next map shows that location, but it's designed to improve the connection between downtown Tampa and USF by providing more frequent service, longer hours of service, and higher quality service along that corridor. At the southern end of the corridor, in the core of downtown Tampa up to Tampa Heights, where the transit is overlaps with the arterial BRT and includes the Tampa Streetcar Extension project. So the extension runs from the existing terminus at Fort Brook Garage, north on Florida, south on Tampa, from Palm Avenue down to the existing system. So again, we're talking about frequent service, expanded hours, and high levels of accessibility to the system. So this becomes, instead of a transit-served environment, it's really a transit-rich environment. And we're looking at and trying to understand better how to guide land use and development along that corridor. So this map shows those locations. The yellow on the right-hand side is the existing streetcar line plus the extension up to Palm Avenue in Tampa Heights. The arterial BRT line is shown as the blue lines with the circles indicating an early draft of the station location sites running north on Florida with the Tampa Pair south of Violet, and then Florida both directions up to Linebaugh, crossing to Nebraska, north on Nebraska to Fowler, east and west on Fowler to 30th, and then up to the VA, most likely with a turnaround at the University Area Transit Center. This stitches together the city's urban neighborhoods from downtown to Tampa Heights and Seminole Heights to the older neighborhoods and commercial districts along North Florida, Nebraska, to Fowler Avenue, and to USF and the VA. And if you know what's happening up at the north end, there's a lot of development and investment in the pipeline, especially associated with the redevelopment of the University Mall site. The Rhythm Project is going to completely transform the east end of Fowler, and we expect the market to improve significantly for similar kinds of more urban investments at the north end of the line. So the research that we've completed is a detailed context assessment looking at conditions along the full extent of the project corridor. Much of that is organized around conditions by reporting of conditions by sub-area, by the major neighborhoods that I just talked about. And then we have a briefing book, which is a summary document, which rolls that up into a briefer statement about conditions along the project corridor and some of the key issues that are going to drive our thinking or driving our thinking about policy and strategies. We refer to this map as a tool to help understand some of the diversity of the corridor and the diversity of opportunities for new development or redevelopment along the corridor. In this case, the pink is residential, primarily single-family neighborhoods, and the darker pink, or that reddish, I'm not sure what color that is exactly. That's the non-residential, so that's commercial, institutional, and other uses along the project corridor. So you can see how that opportunity for change evolves and shifts as we move north downtown. Significant opportunity for additional infill and redevelopment, especially to the north end of downtown. In Tampa Heights and Seminole Heights, those opportunities are fairly narrow along the corridor, but with some larger footprint properties, including the Robles Park site. The north of the river on Florida, we've got the larger scale, older suburban shopping center sites, large footprint sites, primarily in single ownership with really great opportunities for change. And then the project shifts to Nebraska. Nebraska's conditions are somewhat similar to Tampa Heights and Seminole Heights. And then Fowler, we've got larger footprint, commercial, some of that aging, some of that not performing terribly well and available for change. So if you think about it, we'll talk about the different kinds of opportunities from urban infill downtown to incremental infill and adaptive reuse in the center of the corridor, and then suburban retrofit as we move north and we have more auto-oriented uses and larger footprint sites. So for the workshop, we went a little deeper into the existing conditions, but for today we wanted to get into the plan strategies. I'll present where we're headed with those around three sort of big questions, and then open it up for discussion. So we would like to spend the bulk of our time listening to you all. So the three sort of buckets of recommendations are organized around improving walking, biking, and access to transit, promoting housing affordability and diversity, and encouraging transit-oriented development and protecting neighborhood character. So the first big question, how can we make it easier to walk and bike along the corridor and the transit stops? And the transit trip ends in a walk or a bike trip, ends and begins with a walk or a bike trip. So walkability and bikeability is really fundamental to what we're thinking about. This is just a quick list of the recommendations that we're focused on. In a lot of cases, this project is organized to kind of elevate and highlight work that's being done by others in other studies. So ideas about speed management, pedestrian facility improvement, bike facility improvement, and ensuring that development regulations help deliver a higher quality streetscape environment and street environment is where we're headed with those recommendations. So this is a quick list. We can circle back and talk about these in a little bit more detail, but we wanted to review those quickly with you all. On the affordable housing side of the equation, the question is, how can we protect existing housing affordability, encourage new affordable housing, and increase the diversity of housing options? So three basic dimensions to that question that we're focused on. We're starting to develop a toolkit that describes the actions that would be appropriate. That's organized around these five basic kinds of tools: housing programs, regulatory options, zoning tools, funding mechanisms, and capacity building. So we're starting to build out a set of recommendations around these basic ideas. We've talked before on calls about the regulatory tools to streamline review processes, provide some regulatory relief in terms of limited parking, and also the potential for density bonuses to help support affordability. So that's just one of the five sets of recommendations that we're focused on delivering. And then the second part of that is the diversity of housing that's offered in the market that could be affordable, it could be market rate. So right now, the market's delivering the two ends of the spectrum just off of this graphic, the single-family homes and larger scale apartments. But there's a lot of missing middle housing types that aren't being delivered in the market, and we're trying to look at both what's driving that, what may be driving against delivering more diverse types, and if we can develop regulatory tools to try to promote that housing close to the corridor. So we're dealing with this from both an affordability and a diversity perspective in terms of housing. The bulk of this presentation is going to be about encouraging transit-oriented development and protecting neighborhood character. So the big question is, how can we encourage development of underused and auto-oriented sites, bring new uses to the corridor, ensure projects fit the surrounding community? And that project fit question, of course, is an important question because we've got single-family neighborhoods at various levels of stability right up against the project corridor, and we want to be really careful that what we do along the corridor supports goals for neighborhood stability, neighborhood conservation, neighborhood improvement. So the basic structure of the recommendations are organized around the definition of place types. So this would be, if you think about these as your future land use categories, your kind of replacement future land use category set, these would be the primary tools to guide development and redevelopment. They provide the foundation for comprehensive plan policies and then eventually future zoning standards. It includes both guidance about land use, but also about form and scale and quality of development. And we're thinking really carefully about how development along the corridor relates to the surrounding communities. So we're thinking about transitions and buffers and scaling back what occurs up against the adjacent single-family communities. So I don't really expect you to read this table on the screen, so I apologize. The text is small, but the way this is structured, it's going to be presented like this. So we're going to have this presentation up on the website when we're finished the call today, and you can download this and take a look at it. So typically, a lot of times, this isn't meant to be read on screen. It's meant for you to pull this down and look at it later so you have a reference. But how we're organizing the recommendations is in this structure, this framework. We're looking at the different place types that would be applied. Those place types are key to specific locations. They help guide development of typical projects on sites that are available along the corridor. They identify several qualities of development, the building types, density, intensity, parking, and height. And there'll be additional recommendations about things like important matters like how buildings relate to streets and public spaces, where parking can be located, how parking would be accessed, and then ultimately we'll make recommendations about the parking standards themselves, how much should be provided for different projects along the corridor. So this is the structure. The next set of slides dives into these deeper, but I wanted to give you the sort of broad picture first. So as I mentioned, there's 6 different types. We're still debating about creating 2 different TOD neighborhood types or just one neighborhood type, but this is basically the neighborhoods within walking distance of the stops. But we have, in our current configuration, 3 types of centers: downtown, the urban centers, which would be those pulse points of activity in a few locations along the corridor, and then the TOD centers, which would be more neighborhood-scaled centers. And then we have the TOD corridor, which happens in between the centers, and the neighborhoods, which would be the neighborhoods within walking distance of stops. So that's the broad structure, and what I'll do is walk through each of these types now so you can get a better understanding of what we're talking about and the scale and kind of development that we are recommending. So the first, downtown. So this is a very small footprint affected by this recommendation. Downtown is already covered by zoning and zoning categories that have been improved over the last several years to address questions about frontage, orientation, ground level use, and then the Downtown Partnership and the city have been working on some parking reform to make it easier to deliver more urban projects with less parking. So downtown somewhat takes care of itself, but we do need to look at how we can improve the existing regulatory framework to help make sure development supports transit in the best way possible. So downtown is the most transit-rich place in the region. It has the ability to support significant intensification of use. If you think about downtown, the street network is basically set, so there's not going to be more roadway capacity, but there's better ways to use that roadway capacity or use that street space to move folks, and that's through the delivery of enhanced transit options, and that's what the streetcar project, arterial BRT project are all about. Downtown is a place with tall buildings, primarily served by structured parking, active storefronts and streetscapes, and the city has made significant investment the last several years to improve walkability and to improve streetscape conditions. The next category is between that more neighborhood center and downtown. So we're calling these the TOD urban centers or urban center category. We're only talking about this applying in a few locations. So north of downtown between Palm Avenue, 275 and Palm Avenue, north of the river as a way to encourage more intensive development of those larger footprint auto-oriented uses between Waters and the Hillsborough River, and then over by USF at the University Mall property, which is essentially what's been approved, the Innovation Park area of USF up by the VA. So that's basically the scale of development there. These categories would allow for a broader range of uses if the institutions wish to go that way, but this is the idea is that there's just a few pulse points of more intense activity in a couple locations. What we're talking about here are mid-rise buildings, active ground floor uses. These would be community centers or sub-regional centers for commercial activity, higher density housing, education, and employment. We see these as being very urban in form, buildings lining the perimeter of blocks, parking tucked in the middle, and real focus on active ground floor uses and active streetscapes. This sketch shows a general location along the corridor. This sketch shows North Florida Avenue north of the river. So this would be imagining those large footprint retail sites starting to redevelop in a more urban and walkable form. So we're starting to think about how those improvements on those sites could be phased, how early phasing of improvements could be more walkable and more transit supportive, and allow for build-out over time of a more urban pattern of development. The character of urban centers is like you would see in any good quality walkable urban environment. Focus on really, developing code recommendations and plan recommendations to focus on the quality of the ground floor frontage of those buildings, lining quality streets and public spaces. The TOD centers is the next scale down, and it's a bit of what's emerging in a few locations along the corridor now. If you think about what's happening south of Hillsborough Avenue on Florida, that's kind of emerging as a neighborhood center of activity. There's been a couple projects that represent the general scale of development that we believe is appropriate for key locations along the corridor. So we're talking about generally in the vicinity of Columbus, the crossings of Columbus, MLK, Hillsborough, Sly, north of Bush Boulevard, so this could be the potential redevelopment of the Floraland Mall site, and then at Nebraska Fowler and at 15th and Fowler. So these are 4 to 5 story buildings, relatively dense, but not nearly the scale or footprint of what you would see in the downtown or urban center place. The scale of that development is going to be influenced by the scale of sites available for redevelopment, so there's sort of a natural lid on how large these developments could be, and then we're looking at transitional development that tapers down to the neighborhoods, so the introduction of missing middle housing types adjacent to the single-family neighborhoods that are off the corridor. You can see the narrow street, which would be a condition along Florida Avenue at one of the centers. That's what this image shows. This next image would be Fowler, so a much larger right-of-way, and you can get a sense for the scale of potential buildings where you've got larger footprints along that frontage. The TOD center kind of development, like all of what we're talking about, really focused on delivering quality streetscapes and public spaces, very walkable environments, easy to get to from the neighborhood, delivering additional alternative kinds of housing to support demand along the project corridor, really thinking carefully about how we get better streetscape conditions. This is the height, so this is one of the patches of frontage along the Florida corridor where we've got an example of how you can improve streetscape conditions with a relatively modest building setback and the right rules in place to guide design decisions. The TOD corridors are the locations between the centers, and so this is a slightly smaller scale of development, up to 4 stories, still allowing for a mix of uses, still addressing the transition back to surrounding neighborhoods. The scale is more neighborhood scale, 2 to 3 story building types. Very similar conditions on the streetscape, though, as across the corridor. So walkability is a fundamental goal for each of the types, and recommendations will address that in the conference plan recommendations as well as in code recommendations. And in the neighborhoods, we're talking about fairly modest scale infill and redevelopment close to the corridor that would introduce some new housing types, either small lot single family, some attached housing, and possibly small apartments. So I know there's sensitivity about the appropriate level of change in the surrounding neighborhoods, and so we would expect to get some dialogue going about this pretty soon, but this is the idea is where we're delivering this enhanced transit, we can also promote neighborhood stability with the introduction of some additional types of housing to increase diversity. So this is a summary of that whole story. The blue is downtown, the purple is the urban centers and those pulse points along the corridor, and then the TOD centers are 7 locations around key stops, primary stops, where there's the potential for a slight uptick in density intensity to what happens on the corridor generally. So this is the structure that we're starting to advance the details of. We're starting to map the locations of these more carefully. So we're developing a map set now that shows exactly how far, parcel by parcel, block by block, each of these designations goes, and how that relates to the surrounding neighborhoods. So you'll be able to see specifically when we release those maps in the next few weeks, how we're mapping this category and how that can influence the development pattern. So with that, I think, I met my 3:30 target. Let's go ahead and open it up for Q&A and discussion. I haven't had my chat window open, so I don't know if I've missed anything so far. Michelle, do you want to check to see what's in, and we can start to go through the chat and catch up with folks?
Yep. We just got a chat at 3:30 from Lisa Monteleone. I haven't had a chance to read it ahead of time, so I apologize. There's been a lot of discussion regarding Fowler Ave. I would like to bring a bit of attention to Bush Boulevard. Yes, redevelopment of the Floraland Mall site would be welcome. However, with the state occupying most of the property, the owner is unlikely to offer the property up. There are other opportunities along Bush that should be explored. Zoning categories on Bush are commercial intensive, where housing cannot be developed without rezoning. The prior administration was strongly opposed to downzoning, wanting to preserve the little commercial intensive there is in the city.
So there's a whole series of things to address in that question, but I can speak to some of the basics anyway. I think we're focused on the narrow patch of Bush Boulevard west of 275 to the end of the study area. So we're not addressing like Bush or Hillsborough or MLK or Columbus broadly. We're narrowly focused on the crossing at Florida, so where the corridor crosses. The Floraland Mall site, and the Floraland Mall site represents other challenges too. That portions of that have been sold out, so it's not just in the state's hands. That there's private ownership of that whole parcel as well. So one of the problems with mall sites is they tend to sell off the boxes over time, and ownership gets fragmented. I think there's a fair debate about where to focus. Our sense is that the Floraland Mall site is not performing as strongly as the big box to the south. So we thought that would be the more appropriate place to identify a center. We don't believe that that's going to happen anytime soon, that the market is not very strong right there to drive significant investment. We think there's other sites that are going to capture investment sooner than that. But the other thing, too, is that that commercial intensive category, we wouldn't consider adding the potential for residential development as a downzoning, we think that's providing more opportunities for change of those properties over time. So what we're trying to do is open up the possibility for these places that are specifically aligned with transit service, because both population and employment intensity is important to build the base of ridership, and help justify and support the investment. So for us, there's less of a, we don't necessarily favor employment intensive over residential intensive land uses, because both categories along the full project corridor help support ridership. So the more we can get population employment aligned to the corridor, the more likely it is that people are going to use the transit, and we can support that transit investment over the long haul. The downzoning question is a challenge in Florida overall, is that, with the Burt Harris constraints on what we can do, downzoning anything is very, very difficult. It's not really our intention to be taking away development rights, is really trying to guide how those development rights are delivered, and drive them to be more urban and walkable places. So a slightly less focus on the raw density intensity and more along walkability and transit accessibility. So that's a kind of you asked us a tough question, so that may be a partial answer, so we can dive back into that if you've got a follow-up.
I don't see any more comments at this time, and scrolling through, I don't see any hands raised at this time.
I mean, one of the things that might generate some discussion is the impact on the surrounding neighborhood. So we know that there's some concern about increased density and intensity. We've gotten a little bit of feedback through the survey tool on the website and through the public workshops about that. But not a significant amount. I mean, it's not like people have said, absolutely not, we don't want to see change along the corridor. I think people recognize that if we can direct it properly, the change is going to be a good thing, both for the corridor and the surrounding neighborhoods, as well as for the city as a whole. So we feel like we're generally on the right track, and we haven't had a whole lot of pushback yet. But I wanted to bring that up. If anyone has a concern, it would be good to hear it and help us understand kind of the dimensions of what the community issues might be.
Steve, this is Lisa Monteleone, and I have been on the board of my civic association off and on for probably 20 years, and I've lived in the area, either in my current location, which is in the Terrace Park neighborhood, between Bush and Fowler, just west, just west of the Temple Terrace city line, and it goes all the way up to 30th Street. The adjoining neighborhood, from 30th Street to Nebraska, is known as the University Square Civic Association, not to be confused with the university area. They picked that name probably 50 or so years ago because a lot of USF professors used to live there before before Tampa Palms and North Tampa was really developed. So more than 50 years probably. And you mentioned, and I put this in the comments, you mentioned the redevelopment of the Floraland site. I had some interaction with the owner years ago of that mall property that includes the out parcels, and they weren't very welcome to any suggestions about rehabbing or utilizing some of their property for other means. They have the state contract in there with CareerSource, so they're unlikely to want to do anything with that property. And when I say interactions, it was personal. My boyfriend is a contractor, and it had to do with renovations to the building and interior, because the roof was leaking so bad he refused to replace the roof. But that aside, there are a lot of along Bush Boulevard that I'd like to talk about and see redeveloped, because Fowler has, been developed over a period of time, and, it's aesthetically pleasing. It is definitely not bikeable or walkable, in my opinion, given the speed of traffic on both Bush and Fowler. The sidewalks on Fowler are a little bit better than they are on Bush, but not a lot. But Bush is horrible. I mean, the sidewalks are, 3 feet, in places, or non-existent in others. The city recently put in new sidewalks west of the west of Nebraska, I think it was, up by Chamberlain High School, even in that area. But Bush is ripe for redevelopment. There's one property that code enforcement went in and actually demolished. So there's a very large city block. It was a furniture store 20 years ago and had been sitting empty for a long time. And code enforcement had so many code cases against the building, they just went ahead and tore it down.
That's the northwest corner of Nebraska and Bush?
No, that's further east.
Okay.
Than Nebraska. I can't remember the cross street. I can get it and send the information to you.
This one was a motel. That one was a motel, right?
That one, yeah. The property at 275 and Bush was a hotel that was also torn down, and it was supposed to be redeveloped into apartments. I had heard from a developer consultant friend of mine, but that never materialized. But there's a lot of opportunity on Bush Boulevard. And I also wrote in the comments that the previous administration was very opposed to downzoning commercial intensive properties in the city of Tampa. Now, the current administration might feel differently about that, and I hope that they do. The property on, it's not McKinley, I think it's, I can't remember, my mind is just fried, but with street names. But there's a apartment property across from the Mosey Renaissance Festival site that had a lot of pushback from the administration because that also was zoned heavy commercial or commercial intensive, and the administration really opposed having that zoning changed. But I was on council at the time, and obviously we voted differently, and we approved the project, and there are apartments there now. So I don't know what kind of pushback you'll get from the city with trying to downzone properties in the corridor along Bush Boulevard or Fowler Avenue or Nebraska or anywhere, but it's worth the fight.
Yeah, currently, in our coordination with the city, we haven't heard any significant concerns about that express. So we've talked about all of these locations allowing multifamily and specifically looking at potential incentives to promote affordable projects, either standalone affordable or inclusionary projects as part of density increases. So far, no specific concern about that. I mean, I understand the general concern about losing those places where you could get some employment intensity, but really the corridor is connected to the most employment-intensive locations in the region. So the corridor is an excellent place to support residential development, especially affordable projects, because of that accessibility.
And I just, one last thing before I let somebody else speak, but I can tell you just with neighborhoods in general, and everybody probably on this call knows it, are going to fight any type of affordable housing. I mean, I myself bought 3 lots, rezoned them, split them in 2, and on my own street, and my neighbors showed up at the rezoning hearing, yelling at me saying that it was going to be Section 8 housing, and it was going to kill the neighborhood, and all these horrible things. And these are people I've lived alongside for 30 years. So, you know, neighborhoods in general, if they're active and involved and engaged, you'll be hearing from them.
Yeah, I can say I've followed a little bit some of the discussions at city council level regarding apartments in South Tampa.
Oh yeah.
It was interesting that several council members' reaction to that regarding the tenancy of those units. That
they're having a workshop tomorrow about the moratorium in CC 35 CMU. I had it written down, CMU 35 and, hang on. UMU 60, CMU 35, and CC 35.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're definitely in discussion with the city and the planning commission about the categories and how the conversion, the FAR conversion allows for additional units. I mean, in our case, more intensity along this corridor where we have the commitment from HART and the city to deliver enhanced transit is definitely the appropriate place for that kind of development. It's making sure that story's clear and we can continue to get support for that kind of thinking.
We have a couple more comments in the chat. In the urban centers, will Hillsborough County and the City of Tampa consider regulatory tools that not only prescribe design standards, but also trip reduction ordinances and transit benefits ordinances?
We'd be interested to know more about what you're thinking specifically regarding the ordinances. I mean, we believe, based on the transit investment, that there's justification to reduce parking standards, but that may not be across the board depending on the context. So in places where there's the potential to support some spillover parking in public spaces or in private lots, we think there could be potential for significant reduction in the portions of the neighborhood, portions along the corridor adjacent to the single-family neighborhoods. We do have a concern about underparking new projects and leaving the communities to deal with the spillover effects. So we are looking at trying to balance those two matters. But in terms of addressing the transit benefits, that's one of the specific things that we're looking at. We're looking at, from a walkability standpoint, continuing and building on the work the city's done in the past to get additional sidewalk space, especially buffered space to the back of curbs for sidewalks. So that would be one of the related matters. Walkability is directly connected to transit supportiveness, so walkability is a key concern. And then the transit benefits is really the primary justification for increasing density intensity is related to the introduction of the transit service. And to support the transit service, to the extent that we need it, we would be looking for some set-asides of property for stops. But that's the only thing specifically that we've got now that we're thinking about. But it'd be interesting to know more about what you got in mind.
Sure. This is Sarah Hendricks. I work at University of South Florida, and I work in the field of transportation demand management. So when I speak of trip reduction ordinances, basically these are regulatory tools that support design standards such as reductions in parking minimums. So whenever you take away parking, you have to put something there alongside it to enable people to better use public transportation, to better bicycle, to better use walking, and other types of transportation services. And so trip reduction ordinances are packages of incentives and requirements and programming that harnesses the power of businesses and employers in the area to contribute towards providing various kinds of programming for their employees as well as their customers. And trip reduction ordinances have been...
Are you referring to like a fee and lieu program, or is
no, it's not.
Okay.
It's not a fee in lieu. But this is something that has been done. I'm sorry?
No, it could be, and other communities have done that. I'm just curious about where you're going.
Sure. Yeah. So many cities have instituted trip reduction ordinances across the United States. There's a variation on that known as a transit benefits ordinance that is picking up steam in some of the larger cities in the United States. And basically the principle behind that is to simply require employers to set aside a certain amount of earned income pre-tax to their employees. And that pre-tax income would be a set aside for transportation, for purchasing transportation. So instead of giving employees free parking, you remove that free parking and instead have a set aside of pre-tax income for the employee to make the decision for themselves. Do I want to purchase parking or do I want to purchase a transit pass? And so what this does is it empowers the employees to make different kinds of decisions with regard to how they travel. And there are a variety of other benefits with that. For example, with the pre-tax, you are reducing the payroll tax of the employer, and you're reducing the federal income tax of the employee. And this is also known as qualified transportation fringe benefits, and it is it's spelled out in the Internal Revenue Code, Section 132F. And so basically the idea is to develop these types of mechanisms that throw the advantage towards people using public transit. And because I don't think that the built environment is going to do it all. We need this built environment, and we're talking a lot about it, and it's extremely important. It provides the foundation for it. But we need other things like incentives, programs, services that work alongside those things so that we create a more complete package.
Understood. Yeah, I gotcha.
Okay, we have another comment. HB 1339 from the 2020 session empowers local governments to override the underlying zoning to allow affordable housing development. Is there any talks with the city and the county about utilizing this flexibility to facilitate TOD?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that we're discussing regarding affordable housing is we're doing some financial testing to see how powerful the density bonus and parking reduction would be to help deliver affordable projects along the corridor, as one manner of speaking. We're making a general assumption that we would be going to mixed-use land use categories along the full corridor, so that specific question about overriding underlying zoning wouldn't apply, because we would be allowing multifamily residential across the board. We could talk a little bit more about the places where, like a CI zone, overriding the CI zone for affordable housing, but then providing a TOD alternative path, which would get you additional density and intensity. What we're trying to calibrate really is which of these benefits or increases in density and intensity would be available to every development, and which would be available only to affordable projects. So we can maintain the incentive for the affordable projects over all projects. So if we looked at it purely from a ridership standpoint, we would like to see more people along the corridor to support ridership. But the region needs more affordable housing, so we might need to tip the scales a bit to support those affordable projects, and not allow everyone to access the highest densities and intensities for market rate projects. So it's a really critical question. We're just starting to get into that discussion about the right tools and how to calibrate the tools, but that's definitely part of the overall dialogue.
Hi, Steve. Could I jump in as well?
Sure.
Hi, everyone. Caitlin Johnson with SB Friedman. We've been leading the strategy development related to affordable housing. So just to piggyback on that response, we have been conducting interviews with the city of Tampa as well as folks with the Hillsborough County related to current use of tools and policies and strategies to help inform this best practice toolkit that Steve had introduced earlier in the presentation. We have talked about HB 1339 with both the city and the county to understand their current thinking about using this. It's still so new about how you can structure the program, what that looks like. So it's our understanding that the city's been exploring it a little bit. We participated in a webinar recently hosted by the Florida Housing Coalition that talked about this. So we pointed them into the direction to some of the examples of communities that are already starting to dig into the weeds and figure out how that sort of program could be structured. So it's something that is on folks' radar, and we are mentioning it in our best practice toolkit as an option to further explore flexibility in zoning to support the affordable housing. So happy to answer any more questions related to that specifically, but thought I'd just chime in there.
Thanks, Galen.
And just a comment from Lisa, FYI, Hillsborough County offers HART Flamingo passes at 75% off to employees.
Thanks, Lisa.
That's good to know.
We have a quiet group today. And anyone else have any comments or any hands raised, or you want to unmute and jump in? Let me give folks time to think about that for a second. I'm going to go ahead and skip up to a next step slide. This may trigger some additional discussion. We did our public workshops. HART did a significant blast to their email list and social media, but we're still encouraging folks to jump on the project website and complete a survey. So we've got some basic questions about the future of communities along the corridor that's going to be up for another week. Or no, I'm sorry. Michelle, do I have this right? Does it close on Friday?
Yes, that's correct, Steve. It closes on Friday.
I think we discussed that. I'm not sure if we want to leave it open a little bit longer after this.
Yeah, we might leave it open for another week. There's really no particular pressure on that closing date. We can take feedback for a bit longer, but we do want to help. We want to try to drive people to that as we're starting to put the policy recommendations together. So we're in the process of refining strategies and recommendations. As Caitlin said, SB Friedman is helping us with the housing affordability focused recommendations. So that's looking at both the production of new affordable units as well as the protection of naturally occurring affordable units in neighborhoods. So that process is underway. Plus Urbia, the urban design firm that's on the team, is helping us start to develop the regulatory framework, so the recommendations about the standards for development that would apply by place type along the project corridor. And then we're gearing up for a more detailed planning exercise for the Palm Avenue station area. So this is where there's a link between the HART Arterial BRT project and the streetcar extension project. We're going to look a little more carefully at conditions within the footprint of the Palm Avenue station area, and we'll be doing some charrette workshop sessions with the community to help map the categories and to understand what people's concerns and issues are. And we're looking to wrap up the project documentation. So the work that we've done previously, add the recommendations to that package, including the station area plan and planning process, and wrap it up in late fall 2021. So I think we're going to we had this scheduled for an hour and a half, but it looks like we're going to concede a half an hour to folks. Michelle, do you want to close us out with a reminder about the website stuff?
Sure. We have our website is up, and it's been updated a little bit to include the survey that Steve spoke of. And right up at the top, you can see that there's a workshops and survey tab if you go to the actual website, and then there's a link to the survey there. And we also have documents for review up on the website, the context assessment.
Yeah, we have all these meetings have been recorded and are posted on the website. The presentations that we've provided to different groups and organizations are out there. So we've got a good collection of material that we've prepared so far. It's all available on the site.
And here's our list of contacts. We welcome anybody to reach out to us with any questions or comments.
Yeah, please share if you're aware of examples you think we should take a look at, or there's specific kind of tools that would be useful for us to bring into the discussion. Please share those with us, and we'll make sure that gets into the gets in front of the study team. That's the group of folks from the HART, City, County, Planning Commission, and Hillsborough TPO that are guiding us through the process. So reach out to us, and we'll share that information with the rest of the team. And then we've got a couple more of the working group meetings scheduled, so you'll get invitations for those. And we'll provide more detailed recommendations about the overall corridor, and then we'll start to move into discussions about the application of these ideas within the Palm Avenue Station area. So Nicole, I think with that, do we have any more, nothing new in the chat?
Just one comment from Lisa.
Yeah, we do have a comment let's see, from Lisa. Just to let us know that Commissioner Overman is always looking to expand the toolbox of incentives to encourage developers to pursue affordable housing. Any suggestions are welcome.
We're working on that, so we'll have more detail in our package of recommendations to talk about on our next call. So Nicole, I think you covered our bases. I think everyone, no more questions. So are you ready to close out?
Yes, thank you all for attending. We appreciate your input and suggestions and ideas.
I'm here, Nicole.
I am here, but you can't hear me. Can you hear me now, Steve?
I can hear you now, yep.
Okay. Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate your input, recommendations, and ideas, and your feedback. We have one more meeting scheduled, and I believe that's for August. So look out for a follow-up email on that, and please feel free to contact us. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.